There is a place on Earth, more alien than any planet we've ever imagined. A place where sunlight never arrives. Where pressure is so intense, it could crush a human instantly. Where the temperature hovers just above freezing, yet life still survives. And for most of human history, this place remained completely untouched. Because reaching it seemed impossible. But once, just once, humans actually made it there. To the very bottom of the ocean. And what they found was far more mysterious than anyone expected. The deepest point in the ocean is called the Mariana Trench. A vast scar in the Earth's crust. Stretching over 2,500 kilometers across the Pacific. But at its very center lies something even more extreme. A place known as Challenger Deep. Nearly 11 kilometers below the surface. To put that into perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into it, the peak would still be underwater. It's not just deep. It's a different world entirely. Pitch black. Silent. Crushing. For decades, scientists believed it was unreachable. Because the deeper you go, the more hostile the ocean becomes. And this is where things start to get strange. At just 1,000 meters down, sunlight disappears completely. Beyond this point, the ocean becomes an endless night. At 4,000 meters, you enter the abyssal zone. A cold, dark desert, where food is scarce and survival is brutal. But Challenger Deep lies even deeper. In a region known as the Hadal Zone. Named after Hades, the Greek underworld. And the name is not an exaggeration. Because at this depth, the pressure reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. Imagine an elephant standing on your thumbnail. Now multiply that, hundreds of times. That's the force pressing in from every direction. Any normal submarine would implode instantly. Any human would be crushed in milliseconds. So the question was simple. Could anything ever survive down there? And more importantly, could humans ever reach it? For years, the idea remained nothing more than a dream. Until the 1950s. A time when humans were obsessed with exploring extremes. We had conquered the skies. We were preparing for space. But the ocean remained largely unexplored. And a small group of scientists and engineers decided it was time to change that. Their solution? A machine unlike anything ever built. A deep-sea submersible called the Trieste. It didn't look like a sleek submarine. It looked strange. Almost primitive. A giant gasoline-filled float, with a small steel sphere attached beneath it. But this is where things get interesting. The gasoline wasn't fuel. It was lighter than water, allowing the craft to float. And the steel sphere? That was where the humans would sit. Inside a space no bigger than a small car. With walls over 12 centimeters thick. Designed to withstand unimaginable pressure. Or at least, that was the hope. Because no one had ever tested anything like it. This was uncharted territory. And failure would be catastrophic. In January 1960, two men climbed inside that tiny steel sphere. Jacques Picard and Don Walsh. They sealed the hatch above them. And began their descent. Slowly, they sank into the darkness. At first, everything seemed normal. Light still filtered through the water. Fish swam past the viewport. But as they descended deeper, the world began to change. The light faded. Colors disappeared. And soon, there was nothing left but black. Complete, endless darkness. At 1,000 meters, they entered the midnight zone. At 4,000 meters, they passed into the abyss. Outside, the temperature dropped. The pressure increased. The silence became overwhelming. Inside the sphere, every sound mattered. Every creak. Every groan. Because each noise could mean the difference between survival and instant destruction. And then, something went wrong. At around 9,000 meters. A loud crack echoed through the vessel. One of the outer windows had fractured. For a moment, everything froze. Because at that depth, even the smallest weakness could cause total collapse. This would be like a soda can being crushed, but infinitely more violent. And yet, the sphere held. Barely. But this is where things get even more unbelievable. They kept going. Hour after hour, they continued their descent. Deeper than any human had ever gone before. Deeper than any machine had ever survived. Until finally, after nearly 5 hours, they reached the bottom. 10,916 meters below the surface. The deepest place on Earth. Challenger Deep. For the first time in history, humans had arrived. And what they expected to find was nothing. No life. No movement. Just empty darkness. Because according to everything scientists believed at the time, nothing could survive under such extreme pressure. But the real story was far more surprising. Because as their lights illuminated the seafloor, they saw something moving. At first, it didn't make sense. A faint shape, gliding across the sediment. Flat. Pale. Alive. A fish. A living fish, at the deepest point on Earth. And that changes everything. Because if a fish could survive down here, then the deep ocean wasn't a dead zone. It was an ecosystem. Hidden. Mysterious. Completely unknown. But this is where things get strange again. Later research would suggest that what they saw might not have been a fish at all. Some scientists believe it could have been a type of sea cucumber. Or another deep-sea organism, distorted by the pressure and lighting. Because at those depths, even identifying life becomes difficult. Vision is unreliable. Reality becomes uncertain. And that raises an even bigger question. What else is down there that we've never truly seen? The Trieste stayed on the ocean floor for just 20 minutes. That's all the time they had. 20 minutes, in the most extreme environment on Earth. Then they began their ascent, leaving behind the darkest place on the planet. And for decades after that, no human would return. Think about that. We reached the deepest point in the ocean, once. And then we stayed away. Not because we lost interest, but because it was simply too difficult. Too dangerous. Too expensive. The ocean had won. Or at least, it had kept its secrets. To understand why, we need to look at what makes the deep ocean so extreme. Because it's not just the pressure. It's everything combined. The cold. The darkness. The isolation. It's an environment so alien, it might as well be another planet. And yet, life exists there. Thriving. Adapting. Evolving in ways that seem almost impossible. And that's not even the weirdest part. Because the deeper scientists explored, the more bizarre the discoveries became. Creatures with transparent bodies. Fish with enormous jaws. Organisms that create their own light. Bioluminescence. A natural glow, in complete darkness. Like stars, in an underwater sky. But these creatures aren't just strange. They are perfectly adapted. Every feature, every behavior. Designed for survival in the most extreme conditions imaginable. But here's the real mystery. If life can exist at the very bottom of the ocean, then what are the limits of life on Earth? Or beyond? Because environments like the deep sea might not be unique. Similar conditions exist on other worlds. Under the icy crust of moons like Europa. Or in the hidden oceans of Enceladus. And if life can survive here, then maybe it can survive there too. But before we look to other worlds, there's still one we barely understand. Our own. Because even today, more than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. And Challenger Deep still holds secrets. Secrets that have only just begun to surface. Because decades after the Trieste, humans finally returned. With new technology. New missions. And new discoveries. But what they found would completely change our understanding of the deep ocean. And reveal something no one was prepared for. For nearly 50 years, the deepest place on Earth remained untouched. Silent. Unseen. Unvisited. As if the ocean itself was guarding something. But in 2012, that silence was broken. A single man descended back into the abyss. James Cameron, not as a tourist. Not as a passenger. But as the pilot of a machine designed to go deeper and stay longer than ever before. His submersible was called the Deep Sea Challenger. Slim. Vertical. Almost like a missile, pointed straight at the ocean floor. Unlike the bulky Trieste. This craft was built with precision. Advanced materials. Specialized foam, engineered to survive crushing pressure. Cameras capable of filming in total darkness. Because this time, they weren't just going to visit. They were going to explore. The descent began. Faster than before. More controlled. But just as terrifying. Because no matter how advanced the technology, the ocean doesn't change. At 1,000 meters, darkness swallowed the light. At 4,000 meters, the temperature dropped to near freezing. At 8,000 meters, the pressure became almost unimaginable. And this is where things get strange. As Cameron descended, the outside world became increasingly hostile. But inside, something unexpected happened. A strange calm. No sound. No movement. Just a single human, falling through darkness. It was like drifting through space. Except instead of vacuum, there was crushing force on every side. And the deeper he went, the more isolated he became. Because communication with the surface was limited. Delayed. Uncertain. If something went wrong, help would be hours away. Or never come at all. After nearly 2.5 hours, he reached the bottom. Once again, humans had arrived at Challenger Deep. But this time, they came prepared. As the lights turned on, the seafloor appeared. Flat. Soft. Covered in fine sediment. It looked almost peaceful. But the reality was anything but. Because every inch of that environment was under extreme pressure. A world where survival requires constant adaptation. And yet, life was there. Again. Tiny creatures, crawling through the sediment. Microorganisms, thriving in total darkness. But the real surprise was what wasn't there. No large fish. No obvious predators. Just a quiet, almost empty landscape. And that raises a strange question. Why is life here so different? To understand why this happens,
we look at energy, because the ocean, energy is everything. Near us, life is power of the sun, plants, algae, photosynthesis, by 11,000 years. There's no life, no plants, no direct source of energy. So how do things survive? The answer falls from above, literally, by constantly moving material, dripping down from the ocean, dead plankton, fragments of animals, waste, scientists call it marine snow, it's slow, sparks, unpredictable. Life survive on drops falling 50 miles above you, and that's not even a weird spark, because sometimes, something much larger falls, a whale. Oil ice is 56 years before, a massive event, in otherwise tiny world, and when it lands, it becomes a oasis, hundreds of species together, feeding, competing, surviving, for years, even decades, all from single artists. It's like some beast in the middle of the desert, like Challenger Deep, even though the are rare, so life adapts, it becomes smaller, slower, more efficient, every movement carefully calculated, because wasting energy means death, and this is where things become truly bizarre. Some deep sea organisms have bodies with withstand pressure, flexible structures, no air spaces, because air would be crushed easily. Others use chemicals instead of life, sense their environment, through touch vibration, eventually in complete darkness, where sight is useless, where the world is left unseen. But the real reason this environment is so extreme is pressure. At Challenger Deep, the pressure is over 1,100 years. That's more than 16,000 pounds of storage, enough to crush steel, enough to destroy most materials instantly, and yet, life survives, which means it has adapted like a will. Proteins, cell membranes, even DNA, all modified function under crushing force. It's like rebuilding itself, from the inside out, and that changes everything about you, about biology. But here's where the story takes a dark turn, because when scientists analyze samples of the ocean, they found something unexpected, something that doesn't belong there. Plastic, tiny fragments, of human evolution, at the deepest point on Earth, let us again, a place so remote, so extreme, so unusual, and yet, we've already affected. Microplastics, carrying currents, sinking slowly over time, until we reach the bottom. It's like a fingerprint, left a place we barely understand, and that raises an uncomfortable truth. There is no place on Earth, untouched by humans, not even the deepest ocean, but the real mystery still remains, because despite all our technology, all our missions, all our discoveries, we've only been there a handful of times, just a few visits, to the most extreme places on the planet. Think about that. We sent robots to Mars, we've mapped the surface of moons, but our motion remains largely unexplored, because it's not just difficult, it's unpredictable, dangerous, expensive, and brutally unforgiving. But the real reason it's far more surprising is not just our reaching the bottom, it's our understanding it, because every time we go down there, we discover something new, something that challenges everything we thought we knew. Creatures that shouldn't exist, ecosystems outside.